Hi, I'm Alex Newman. I'm a reporter with the New American Magazine. And today we have an honored guest with us, Elaine Willman. She is the author of Going to Pieces, The Dismantling of the United States of America. This is a book about how the federal government and tribal governments are teaming up and how they're advancing a dangerous agenda that we're going to be talking about. She's also a Cherokee Indian, and her husband is actually a direct descendant of Sacagawea, perhaps one of the most important and famous American Indians of all time. She's the former chair of the Citizens Equal Rights Alliance, and she's currently on the board. And she's also the director of tribal affairs for the Village of Hobart in Wisconsin. Now, last year at the New American Magazine, we did a cover story on this exact issue, how the federal government and the Obama administration were exploiting tribal governments to attack the freedom and the property rights and the states' rights of the American people. And today we're very happy to have Elaine with us in the studio here at the New American. Thank you very much for joining us, Elaine.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Alex. It's a pleasure to meet you, and it's a pleasure to meet the New American staff and be here. I'm just delighted. The book that I wrote was written 10 years ago. It was the voices of farmers, teachers, tribal members, sheriffs, bankers, cattlemen, ranchers that live on 17 Indian reservations, talking 10 years ago about the things that worry them. And it is selling right now in 2015 bigger and faster than when we first launched it in Washington, D.C. in May of 2005. The folks that were concerned about issues are now seeing those issues come right up in their face, and they're struggling with holding on to their property rights, their water rights, their constitutional and civil rights. As most reservations, most Indian reservations are predominantly populated by non-tribal members. And there's a serious spread of tribalism as a governing system over non-tribal citizens in this country that folks in the urban areas and out on the coast may be unfamiliar with, but it's a very dangerous expansion going on now.
When I first got involved in this issue, I heard about what was happening in Brazil. The federal government had been exploiting, and I think that's the correct word here, an Indian tribe down there that said they had never lived on this land, but the federal government of Brazil said we need to return this land to an Indian tribe, and so they bulldozed entire villages. They wiped entire villages off the map. They left thousands of people homeless. They bulldozed schools and hospitals and forced people to take apart their own homes. And the troops came in wearing United Nations uniforms. And this was all very bizarre to me. And then I found out, thanks to your efforts, that some of this kind of stuff, not that extreme obviously, but some of this government exploitation of tribal governments to attack the rights of everyone was happening here in this country. And I read your book and I was just astounded. And it's even more astounding that this is even more relevant today. Now we have even more of these problems going on here. And so what we focused on in this cover story, what we focused on to begin with was how the EPA had unilaterally put 1.2 million acres of land under the jurisdiction of a tribal government. And this was land that Congress had said was no longer a reservation. The Indian tribes had been paid over 100 years ago. And this was just incredible to me. So I want to ask you, what's the situation now with this town of Riverton in Wyoming and the surrounding towns that were placed under tribal jurisdiction by the Obama administration's EPA? And are there any new situations that viewers should be aware of?
Well, you're speaking of the Wind River Indian Reservation, which is home to the Northern Arapaho and Shoshone tribe. My husband is Shoshone. And Riverton, Wyoming, in Fremont County, the largest county in Wyoming, EPA has no authority from Congress or the executive branch or anywhere to create jurisdiction. And it just arbitrarily created 1.2 million acres into Indian country, removing state jurisdiction and authority. It encompassed the whole town of Riverton, Wyoming. The game that EPA and the BLM and many of your federal agencies are playing now is called Catch Me If You Can. They're not even following their own regulations, and it's up to somebody else to just defend themselves against them.
And what are some of the problems with just arbitrarily like that putting non-tribal members under the jurisdiction of a tribal government? I guess they have to pay tax, but they don't get to vote for any of the leadership. What are some of the problems with this idea?
Well, we're all U.S. citizens, or all U.S. citizens are entitled to the full rights and privileges of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and have their civil rights, and as such, as a full U.S. citizen subjected to a separate government, a separate quasi-dependent sovereign government such as an Indian tribe. And again, using a tribal court as an example, your civil rights are reduced, if not gone, and your ability to retain an attorney to represent you is limited if that attorney is not allowed to practice in the tribal court. Non-tribal members cannot attend tribal meetings. They cannot elect tribal officials. They are entitled to a republic form of government, and they should not be governed by a government that does not serve them. Not only does not serve them, is most often adversarial to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing that we talked about when we were doing this article is how these tribal governments pretend to be sovereign type entities, but really they're funded by the federal government through
Yes.
U.S. taxpayer dollars, and in many ways they're carrying out the agenda of the federal government and the Obama administration.
Yes.
So I know there's a big flare-up going on. We were talking about this a little bit before we started in Montana. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us what's going on with Montana on the Flathead Reservation, and what is the federal government's agenda? What is the tribal government's agenda? What do they want to accomplish? And could this kind of model be used in other places?
Mm-hmm. The federal government, working with the tribal government and the state government, have formed what they call the CSKT, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribal Water Compact. The Supreme Court ruled that states own all the navigable waters and the soils beneath them for all land ceded to that state. The governor of Montana, the attorney general of Montana, the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources of Montana, the whole executive branch of Montana has fallen in with the Obama administration and a very small Salish Kootenai tribe, and has in this tribal water compact given all waters from the Canadian border down to Wyoming on the western side of the state of Montana. That's 11 counties and 350,000 people. The settlement agreement that the governor just signed off on grants this small Salish Kootenai tribe all the waters and tributaries of 11 counties, including municipal waters, private wells, all the water. It's 20% of the Montana land base, and it's 30% of the Montana population.
And that would destroy the farmers and the people who live
Shuts
there.
off, it puts the little tribal government in charge of irrigation. It puts the tribal government in charge of stockwater ponds for the cattlemen. It puts the tribal government in charge of municipal waters and wells, and there's a lot of little communities up and down 11 counties. So I have been out there 5 times since last September, doing whatever I can to help the citizens fight this. The point is, the reason I think it's a template is because a lot of states, especially your executive branches, are so dependent on the federal funding that they get for their states that they become like puppets, and they'll do what the federal executive branch tells them to do at risk of losing their federal funds if they don't. So it's just a horrible thing, and the harm is that 6 other tribes across the state of Montana will go to that governor and say, we want the same deal. You have to treat our tribe the same. And and the waters get placed into trust, held in title by the United States on behalf of this little tribe. So that's how the federal government and the Obama administration is using Indian reservations and tribal governments to go out and capture state waters and natural resources. And the tribal governments are just very willing pawns, and the tribal members, some of them are deeply affected. They're private property owners. They pay taxes. They have irrigation they're going to lose. Some of the tribal members are as harmed as anybody else.
Another article we recently did for the New American also touches on some of these tribal issues. There's a so-called human rights group purporting to speak for some natives of Alaska and some natives of Hawaii, and they've asked the United Nations to intervene, and they claim that the United States is occupying them, and they want the UN, and one of them mentioned the Russian government as well, that they should intervene and get involved here. Now, I know the UN has been very active pushing these Indian issues. We had one of their pseudo-experts, I think they call them special rapporteurs, come over here on indigenous affairs, and they said we should give back Mount Rushmore. And they have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that say any land that was ever occupied or used by an indigenous person needs to be returned. Obviously, that's our whole country. So if we obeyed that treaty, which Obama signed on to, we would be in some serious trouble. But what's the agenda here? What's going on with these supposed human rights groups and organizations and these tribes in Alaska and the natives in Hawaii that are demanding UN help to become liberated from U.S. occupation? What do you think is the agenda?
Well, it's funny because as I was writing Going to Pieces 10 years ago, I received phone calls from some folks in Hawaii and went over there on 2 occasions. I received a call just last week. What is this, June of 2015? Just last week, I received a phone call here in Wisconsin from the folks in Hawaii telling me that this movement for seceding, for taking back Hawaii and seceding from the United States is now being funded by the Chinese, and that it is really gathering steam. And my first reaction was, holy cow, Hawaii is a rather strategic base for our country from a military and public, national security. It is concerning that foreign governments that love to gamble are now moneying up these radical voices to help Hawaii get a Native American tribe. We are a country being intentionally divided and having states that are being whose authorities are being intentionally reduced or minimized, marginalized, if not outright ignored. There seems to be a movement to just tear down the fabric of this country. It's hard to envision us in the long term being the United States with the combined marriage of the federal executive branch and the United Nations and Agenda 21 folks, and the environmental groups and the big billionaires. And then when they've got 566 tribal governments and little reservations to use as launch pads, you can tear up a country pretty quick. So this Indian policy is but one tool. It's just one part of it. And I don't mean this to disparage in any way the American Indian. I make clear separations between my love and affection for Indian people and government decision making. If it's a tribal government decision, federal, state, global, a government decision that affects me or my porch is going to get my attention.
So what should be done? I know you're a real expert in Indian policy, maybe one of the foremost authorities in the country. What do you think should happen with Indian policy? What should members of Congress do? How can we sort out this mess that's clearly getting worse?
That's something that I struggle with, and it literally will keep me awake at night, and it's the reason I moved to Hobart, Wisconsin, because Hobart was a local government whose elected officials, all 5 of them, were dedicated to preserving their municipal authority within a former Indian reservation against a pretty aggressive tribe. So my thinking was, if I could come to that zip code, to the Village of Hobart, and work with the Village of Hobart and the Oneida tribe, maybe that could be the petri dish for finding a solution for co-located governments. Because every Indian reservation is not sitting out in a vacuum. It's co-located within counties, towns, cities, states. We need to come back and be one America.
Well, thank you very much for sitting and talking with us, Elaine. We really appreciate having you here in the studio, and we hope you'll come back and join us, and I look forward to working with you as I work on more articles on this massive subject that the American people really need to become aware of.
Well, I appreciate that, because I really think just general information and education can cause the citizens to come back and repair this country the way it has done so before.